really instantly, like that. Hi everyone.
There we are.
Happy to welcome Jo Furniss. Start us off with an intro to you and your book.
Okay. Yeah, I'm Jo Furniss. I'm formerly a journalist, but now I'm a writer. I've published 3 novels in the past and some books of short stories as well. I think I've been on here before talking about the short story anthology, the Afraid of the Light books. But my next novel, which is coming out, well, it came out in ebook today and in bookie book in 2 weeks' time. It's called Dead Mile. And it is a murder mystery set in a traffic jam on the motorway. And that's me.
I'm sure I've read at least one of your books before this. Are you sure you haven't done an author chat with us before? I've definitely read another.
I have done one. I've definitely done one, but I'm actually struggling to remember whether it was for the anthology or it might have been for. Hang on, I've got my props. It might have been for that book, The Last to Know, which came out in 2020, I think.
No, I've read all the Little Children.
Oh my gosh! So we go all the way back then, because that was 2017. Yeah, that was the original.
You talked about the charity anthology. This one is a really unusual kind of concept, isn't it? What made you come up with that? Like a gridlocked murder mystery.
Yeah. So, well, the idea came probably not surprisingly because I was stuck in a traffic jam. Basically, I was on the road. I think I was coming down. I live in Brighton, and I think it was on the A27 coming down into Brighton. And the traffic all kind of came to a halt, and I was in the passenger seat actually, and so in the middle lane. So the cars had all stopped, and then we stopped, and I sort of suddenly almost kind of went like, whoa, because you realize that the guy in the car next to me, the driver in the slow lane, is like really close. You know, they're just like an arm's reach away. And I suddenly sort of thought, wow, like I've gone from being so anonymous, you know, you're very anonymous on the motorway, aren't you? Just the cars are just kind of whizzing past each other. And then all of a sudden you're really like up close and personal. So I thought, oh, that's kind of interesting actually, that you can sort of throw all these people together. And then because obviously I tend to write books with, you know, murders in them, I then thought, oh, wouldn't it be weird if he just kind of like slumped onto the wheel with like a, I don't know, like a big knife in his back or something, and you know, there's no one else in the car with him. How could it have happened? Where could the killer have gone? Because we're all just kind of here in our cars. And that was the whole idea kind of right there. So I sort of drove back home and scribbled it down and thought I'll go with that, see where I can take it basically.
How did you keep track of all the people that were involved in it? Because you've got a locked room mystery, haven't you? But then you've got people dotted around different cars. How did you keep track of where they all were at different points?
Yeah. There's a lot of characters actually. I think that's what interested me about the idea was I love writing different characters, and I sort of thought, yeah, every car basically has got a different character and therefore a different story. So I kind of knew that my challenge, I suppose, was going to be to sort of overlap these stories and sort of connect them in some way. And obviously, you know, some of them are red herrings and some of them are like real serious clues. And that's what my main character Billy has to work out, like, you know, with all these people around her, because she's suddenly, you know, all of these doors open. It's a really hot day. We're actually doing it on the right day because it's probably like the hottest day of the year so far, isn't it? It's, you know, it's a really hot day on the motorway, and so everyone kind of like gets out of their cars. So she's suddenly sort of surrounded by all these people and all this kind of chaos, and she's trying to stop everybody from moving around and possibly, you know, leaving. And she's just trying to work out sort of who all these people are, what is their story, and how do they relate to each other? Do they know each other? Or does some, you know, what are they hiding? And I knew that each one of those cars, each one of those drivers and suspects had to kind of look suspicious for some reason. So they've all got something going on. So yeah, it's a bit like Midsummer's Murders. there's a lot of bad people in one place on the motorway, but I guess that's what I needed really to make it work.
Were you inspired by any real life events? Because I don't want to
Yeah.
give anything away, but there's definitely like a pivotal story that's very close to something that really happened.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I can't go too far there because that would be a massive spoiler. But yeah, I used to be a journalist, so I still read a lot of news. And I think I'm still really inspired by the news, actually. And I think I suppose what's quite interesting for a writer is that you sometimes come up with these ideas and you kind of think to yourself, is this like too crazy? Is anyone going to believe this, or is this kind of too much? And then things happen in the news that are things that are just unbelievable, out of this world, and you think, no, actually, truth so often is stranger than fiction. So you sort of you can kind of take that. Yeah, it's hard to talk about that specific story without sort of massively giving it away, but yeah, I think a lot of people will recognize a setup that really happened, that I've obviously sort of borrowed and changed and moved around. I guess what I'm hoping is that people might find it quite satisfying, because hopefully there's almost like a bit of justice that is meted out that possibly hasn't been meted out in real life. So yeah, I'm being cryptic now. It's not going to mean anything to anyone until
it's hard to. It's one of those books where it's going to be hard to talk about without because we don't want to give spoilers away.
No.
Really, but there's quite a lot of things that you can't talk about without sort of spoiling things a little bit. Sarah and Laura said hello.
Oh, hello.
Sarah said she often thinks that about cars being so close to you when you're on the motorway.
Yes, it's weird, isn't it? And that's what, yeah, I mean, that was literally that's interesting that Sarah's picked up on that, because that was the first thing. And I think what I thought was so great about the motorway setting is that there's not it's probably like the most democratic place I can think of, because absolutely everybody uses the motorway in a way that, not everybody uses the bus, and not everybody goes on the train, and not everybody goes on airports. Whereas on the motorway, you can stop the traffic at any point in the day and you will have an absolute sort of cross section of, British people on that road. And so there's just so many different people, so many different backgrounds, so much possible kind of conflict between all those people. And as Sarah says, 1 minute you're kind of whizzing along and these are just blurred faces. And as soon as the traffic stops, you're really kind of on top of each other, like you're a meter away. It always amazes me, actually, that more people don't just kind of crash into each other. But anyway, yeah. And so there we are. And so I just thought that's actually like loads of potential for me to play with, is the fact that you can just keep opening these car doors and you kind of just got no idea who's going to get out. And then all these people have got to sort of get on and work together a bit, so that was kind of just a fun thing to play with.
I'm potentially the worst host for this for you because I don't drive.
Do you not?
No.
Have you never driven?
No, I've never driven. So no.
Do you find motorways quite frightening then?
Not when I've been on them in people's cars, but I don't probably pay attention because I've never had to drive on one.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's quite intense. Weirdly enough, I was talking to my daughter about this earlier today, because we were talking about learning to drive, and I was saying that before, when you're learning to drive, you can't go on the motorway, so you never get a chance to go on the motorway until you actually just have to do it, sort of throw yourself out there. So it's it's quite scary. Again, it's fun. It's all fun for like a writer to play with, because it's quite a sort of a high stakes environment, I suppose, even if the traffic has stopped.
Well, you come up with quite an innovative way of keeping them there as well, don't you? So they're like going to be stuck there for some time, essentially.
Yeah. This was an issue I had, because obviously, so I had the original idea. Okay, right, we've got a murder mystery. on a motorway, and I wanted my main character to be a police officer woman on her own, and I realized that, you know, she wasn't going to be able to solve this crime in, you know, 5 minutes. It was going to have to last sort of a certain amount of time. So I had to kind of come up with this way to keep everybody at bay, because otherwise they would just, you know, she just called it in, and then a load of detectives were kind of parachuted in, not literally, but, you know, sort of suddenly sort of arrived on the scene, they'd kind of take it away from her. So so there's a sort of a set, I mean, again, without sort of giving too many spoilers, there's a setup where there's quite a big incident that has happened in the city. So that in my mind, because I never say where the motorway is, I did that for a reason, so that people sort of, hopefully everybody kind of imagines themselves in this story, and they sort of imagine that this motorway is somewhere, you know, the place where they always seem to get stuck in traffic. But in my mind, it's a kind of like an orbital motorway around a city. And so, yeah, and so there's basically a sort of an attack of some kind that's taken place in the city, and that's what's caused all the motorways to get jammed up, and that's why everything has kind of come to a stop. And it also is why there's no other police that arrive sort of immediately, because they're all, you know, everyone is deployed to this massive thing that's going on in the city. So I needed to sort of come up with something to keep everyone back. Otherwise my whole story idea would sort of, like, the bubble would burst before it even started.
I think the sort of thing I found from, like, the books I've read of yours is that are often quite isolated. Like, they've got a sense of isolation in terms of, like, the locations and the people.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah, I hadn't actually thought of that. But I always seem to get drawn back to writing, in each of the novels, actually, writing women particularly who are kind of on their own, and they're having to sort of be resourceful, I suppose, and sort of survive. I mean, my first novel you mentioned before, All the Little Children, that's literally like a survival thriller. It's about a mum and her kids who get caught up in the aftermath of a pandemic. It came out before the COVID pandemic, but it's like an almost apocalyptic story. If I had to pitch that now, I would say it was The Last of Us meets Thelma and Louise. Doesn't have zombies, but apart from that, and so in that one, my main character, Marlena, is very much a lone, a lone wolf, really, sort of protecting her little cubs. And in this story, in Dead Mile, my main character is called Sergeant Belinda, nicknamed Billy Kid. Everyone calls her Billy. And because she's basically on her own on the motorway, because she's on her way back, actually, she's not on duty, she's just going home after landing at the airport. And so she's got nothing in her car. She's got no uniform, she's got no radio, she's got no bollards, she's got like nothing of any use to her as a police officer. She has to make it up as she goes along, and she has to kind of almost charm all the information out of people. Like, she can't ever sort of pull rank, really. So she just has to kind of win everybody around. And so, again, like when she's meeting all these different people that are getting out of cars, she has to kind of work out how she can best kind of get through to them and get what she needs out of them, which is, information, basically, so that she can solve this crime. But yeah, she is very isolated. Even though she's surrounded by people, she's very isolated and lonely, and has a sort of a monologue going on inside her head on her own, because she can't trust anyone. So the only person she can talk to really is kind of herself. So we, as the reader, get to kind of hear a lot of this inner, quite snarky dialogue that she has going on with herself as she's kind of reacting to all these people.
It's did you notice like an uptick in sales of All the Little Children during the pandemic? Because some people really got into reading sort of fiction set in things like that during.
Yeah, I mean, the short answer to that is no, not really. I mean, I think when it first started, i.e. the pandemic, I sort of got quite a few messages from people sort of going like, oh, you predicted that, and you saw that one coming, and things like that. But that lasted a really short time, because I think then everyone just suddenly realized, how serious it was going to be. And then I think everyone sort of backed off from it. And I mean, certainly I sort of never kind of promoted the book during that time. I kind of felt quite early on that like, ooh, I don't really want to be like, oh, you're in a pandemic, here's my pandemic book. I just thought that would be way off. And I think a lot of people just avoided reading stuff like that. I don't know, I can't remember. I look back over the whole COVID thing and I sort of forget in some ways what was going on. I don't know about you, what was going on at the beginning of it. I think there was probably a short period where loads of people were suddenly reading, like I heard like loads of people were reading other sort of, pandemic books, like or apocalyptic books like The Stand, or what was it, the Camus book, The Plague, and things like that. But then I think that moment passed, and I think everyone just suddenly got like, no, this isn't to be messed with, sort of thing. And I think loads of people sort of backed off then. So no, I didn't particularly see it. And if anything, I wonder whether the pandemic has kind of made my book a bit irrelevant, because the pandemic that I sort of like imagined for that book is not what actually happened. It happened in a completely different way. And some of the things that I thought, because I did quite a lot of research for my book, and some of the things that I felt absolutely certain about, like for example, in my book, they closed the borders because there's a big sort of virus outbreak in Britain, and I did a bunch of research about sort of real life kind of government response plans, and they all said that the first thing the government would do was close the borders. So places like Australia and Britain, where we have, we can close ourselves off, that was the first thing they said that the governments would do. And then of course the one thing they didn't do here was close the borders. So yeah, but what I did predict right in my book was that all the pasta ran out. I called that one. That actually happens in my book. They go and they stockpile madly on pasta. So I got that right. But yeah, apart from that, not so much the borders.
Laura said that she thinks the section of road would be the M5 on a Friday afternoon.
I have done that stretch many a time. I was a journalist around Birmingham, well, like in Stoke-on-Trent and Birmingham and Shropshire, so all around the West Midlands basically. So yeah, the M5, I spent quite a bit of time up the M5. I spent a lot of time on the M6, which is apparently the busiest stretch of motorway in Europe. Did you know that? That sort of bit that goes from Birmingham up to Manchester, that's what, I don't know, whether that's changed, I don't know, but like 20 years ago, we would say that was the busiest stretch of motorway in Europe. And also the M42. I once, as a journalist, a job that I did was they closed the M42, not far from the airport actually, because they were going to lift in place a new bridge. It was one of those things where they built the entire bridge kind of like in a field next to the motorway. Then they closed the whole motorway and they got this huge crane and they lifted the entire bridge and like put it into place. And my reporting job for that day was to just stand on the fast lane on the M42 in the rain and watch them lift this bridge. I just stood there with my microphone kind of going, "There's a bridge and it's in place." And that was my job. So I feel like that all of that stuff sort of came back into this book, because I can't remember how weird it was to stand there actually on the fast lane of a motorway, because you don't normally walk on the motorway at all. And it felt very, even though I was obviously completely safe because all the traffic was stopped, but I still just the whole time I just felt kind of wrong, like I was standing somewhere I shouldn't be, like on a cliff edge or something. You're like, oh, this is just weird to be on a motorway. So I think all of that stuff kind of came back from back in the day.
Do you think things like that are interesting though, when you go to like some see something weird on a road. We used to live in Turkey, and when I was younger, and like the toll roads were always really empty, and we drove on one once, and there was just a cow kind of strolling along, and you were just like,
Yeah,
"Oh,
you
that's not what you
see.
expect to see on the motorway."
You really don't. You see everything, don't you, on the motorway? I mean, this again, it goes back to this thing of like, it's just all of life is there. There's just, you know, you always just see all kinds of weird stuff thrown out and all kinds of cars and people. I don't know, it's fascinating to see like people's stuff in the back of their cars, you know, like they will, especially in the summer when they've packed up their cars for the, you know, to go away for their holiday, and they've got all of their life is kind of packed into their car. But yeah, not a cow. Oh, another reporting job I remember related to your cow was I once had to, there was some runaway pigs around Tamworth, and they were called like the Tamworth 4. I can't remember how many there were. They were either the Tamworth 3 or the Tamworth 4 or something. I mean, they were Tamworth pigs, those massive ones. And we were chasing them around for ages. There was a helicopter up looking for these pigs. Like it was bizarre. That was another reporting job I had. So yeah, they weren't running down the motorway, in fairness, but they were running wild in Tamworth.
Which, I mean, someone needs to run wild in Tamworth, don't they?
Tamworth probably needs it more than anything. Yeah, that's true. Maybe it's something to do with Tamworth.
So I used to live in Stoke as well. Have you ever been tempted to go up to the author event up there? There's like a Tales on Trent kind of author event that they do.
I think I might have done like a sort of, so I live in Brighton now, but I lived in Shropshire for a while. So I lived just sort of over the border from Stoke. So it was about half an hour's drive from Stoke, in a little town called Newport in Shropshire, not far from Stafford. And so I went, it must have been about 2019. And I went to a couple of events there. And I think that might have been like the kind of the precursor to that. And yeah, they were great, really good fun. There's a lot of really lovely book bloggers based around there. They've got a really nice community going on, and then loads of writers who live around there, like Mel Sherratt obviously lives in Stoke. Hi to Mel, haven't seen her for ages. And Mark Edwards, who lives around that sort of area as well. And yeah, it's a really nice community there. Like I say, loads of lovely bloggers. So I used to go along to those things, and it was nice because I went to university in Stoke, so I would kind of feel like I was going back to my old stamping ground. I would kind of always park somewhere, so I had to kind of walk down through the university and kind of revisit the old streets.
I left Stoke to go to university.
Oh, okay, so that's where you grew up?
No, but I did high school and college in Stoke.
Oh, okay. I've still never had it. It's a very Stoke thing. They have a shop called Wright's Pies. It's not really a chippy. I was going to say it was a chippy then, but it's not really a chippy. It's a pie shop, and I've never had a finer pie in my life than a Wright's pie, which was like this wonderful thing you buy sort of like on the way home from the pub, you know, wrapped in this beautiful paper, and it was lovely and warm, and it would keep your hands warm all the way home. And I still hanker after those Wright's pies. I've never had in, you know, well, it's like 25 years now. I've never had a better pie. Worth a visit.
Sarah said that during COVID she got into reading books as a whole, and that she lived at RAF Stafford when she was 7.
Oh, okay, just down the road. Yeah, I almost certainly visited that was my old like I say, very much my sort of reporting stamping ground. So I was around all of there. Wow, we've got a Staffordshire connection going on.
We've got a whole little Staffordshire vibe going, haven't we?
Yeah, exactly. Look at us. Yeah.
So what's the reception? It comes out today, doesn't it? The Dead Miles. I can't really ask you what the reception is like. You'll have had people reading.
Yeah, so the ebook came out today, and it's not. Yeah, and then the paperback, and it was so confusing. One of my friends who lives in Australia wrote to tell me that he's managed to download the audiobook. So the audiobook is available somewhere, I don't know. It's so confusing. But yeah, so the ebook basically comes out today, and then in 2 weeks' time, the paperback book. So yeah, you're right. I haven't had obviously a huge amount of sort of reaction yet because it's just out there. But what I would say is the reaction from other authors has been amazing, and there's people have been so supportive. I mean, a lot of names that you guys will recognize. That some of my very earliest author readers were people like William Shaw and Trevor Wood, Graham Bartlett. They very kindly read sort of the early version when it was just finished, and their response was lovely, and that made such a huge difference because I'd had sort of a bit of a gap between books, and so I kind of almost felt, I mean, I'm not a debut novelist, but it almost felt like I was in a funny sort of way because I changed publishers as well. So my previous books, these ones that you can just sort of see behind me and all the little children that you mentioned, they were published by Lake Union, which is one of the Amazon imprints. So that was very much, that experience of being published was very much like, very much like digital publishing. It was all very sort of fast paced, and then my new publisher is Bonnier, which is a very traditional publisher. So it's been such a different process, such a different experience, a different publishing experience. I mean, even this thing of sort of having the books going out on sort of 2 launches is like completely new to me. So I kind of felt like I was a newbie again. So having people like I say, like, Trevor and William and Graham sort of, saying lovely things about the book early on, just kind of, I don't know, it really gave me quite a good shot of confidence that I needed, I think, actually. So, but I don't need to tell you about the community, right? It's strong.
Special, isn't it?
Special.
And I think you've labels, especially like Graham, William, and Trevor, you got like real champions of other authors.
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah, no, I mean, I see them doing it all the time, and yeah, everybody's reading everybody else's books and trying to shout out books whenever you can, and it means a lot. It really does mean a lot, and also as a reader, I mean, I love it. I love getting these recommendations, and when you come into a group like yours and you hear everyone's like chatting about a particular book, and you get that kind of natural buzz that's happening around a book, I go out and buy it. I mean, it's obvious, isn't it? So that kind of thing makes such a huge difference. I think to me, in a way, that's more important than kind of formal reviews, if I'm honest. It's lovely when you see people actually talking and discussing and recommending a book. It counts for a huge amount, I think.
It does, and there are certain people, aren't there, that you sort of soon learn kind of like similar books to you. Like, yeah. I know there are certain members of our group who like never really sell me wrong. If they say that, put a review in and say they've really enjoyed the book, I'll probably really enjoy the book.
Yeah, definitely. And people, and yeah, exactly. And I mean, for me, I suppose when I really like someone's writing as well, it always means a lot when they kind of, if they kind of praise my writing, it's, you just kind of think, oh my gosh, that's amazing. Like, I think you're such a brilliant writer. And so to get that back is really special. But yeah, it's always really nice to have those friends that are completely like on the same wavelength. If they like a thing, I'm going to like the thing. Yeah. So I do that a lot with books and TV shows as well. Luckily, I have. Most of the TV shows that we watch in our house are also recommended by writer friends. So like even my husband will trust them. He's kind of like, ask your friends what we should watch tonight, and I have to kind of get on the chat and kind of get a recommendation. Otherwise, he doesn't want to watch anything otherwise.
I do it for books and concerts. I like a lot of live music, and my husband's normally pretty good for like saying we should go and see this person, and he's nearly always right. is annoying, but he is.
That's
Nearly
it's annoying when they're right. It's always annoying when they're right. Yeah. Yeah, that's nice. But it's also nice to kind of be dragged. I mean, I think it goes for music and it goes for books as well, doesn't it? Like sometimes you get sort of not dragged along like in a horrible way, but you get kind of like, someone kind of goes, come and watch this, or read this book, and you just, it's not something you would necessarily have picked up, or a concert that you would have kind of gone online and looked for the tickets, but then it can turn out great. And yeah, I don't know. That's always really good fun.
Andy Hill's telling you to watch Ted Lasso.
Hi, Andy. Oh, I love Ted Lasso. In fact, if I was going to have a sort of like a fantasy casting for my main character for Deb Mile, I think Hannah Waddingham from Ted Lasso would be my my ideal actress to play Sergeant Billy Kidd, because I think she's got, as an actor, she's got so much charm, and I think she could do that. There's quite a bit of humor in the book, and I think she could manage the humor of it. She could totally nail that, but she would also bring this charm to it, and I would be fascinated to see her play a part that's not so sort of glammed up all the time. Like she's so gorgeous that it would be amazing to see her just kind of in like an everyday setting. So if I ever got to kind of pick my dream actor, it would be Hannah Waddingham from Ted Lasso.
Good choice. I think the other thing that's sort of quite interesting, because you've contributed to anthologies and put them together, haven't you?
Yeah.
And I always liken them to being like, when you go to like a music festival and you sort of buy your ticket for like the bands that you're going to really enjoy, but then you go and discover like a bunch of things that you didn't know you liked, but you really, really do after you've been. I think anthologies are like that. You buy them for like 2 or 3 authors that you might know, and then you discover like a bunch of people you want to go and buy the books of.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that was why it was nice. I mean, I think so. I was mentioning before the Afraid. I've got them behind me somewhere, but I can't just grab the book. But the Afraid of the Light anthology. We did 3 of them in the end, and there was a sort of it was a core of us writers, and then we had sort of some guests who came along, and it was absolutely, it was the most delightful thing about that whole process was reading everyone else's work, and sort of discovering other authors. And so many, we got so much reader feedback saying exactly that afterwards. It's like, oh, I'd never read you before, but I decided to go and pick up your book based on it or whatever. That was the first time I'd read Mike Craven, actually. He wrote a short story for one of them, and that was the first time and it was a Tillian Poe story. It was the first time I'd read that, and I just read the short, and I was just immediately like, oh my god. And I kind of just went off and kind of bought like a whole bunch. I was a bit slow to that party. I was a bit late to that party, but kind of went off and bought a bunch of those. But a secret thing I can tell you is that Deb Mile actually started life as a short story, because I had to write one for that anthology. I can't remember whether it was either 2 or 3, and I came back from that little breakdown on the motorway with this idea, and I thought, oh, that would make like a really good short story. So I actually wrote it initially as a 3,000 word short story, obviously just like cramming it. You can imagine it was like, it didn't work terribly well as a story, but it was kind of crammed in. And then we were sending them to each other and reading each other's work. And I sent it through to one of my friends called James Delagi, who you might know. I think he might be part of the group as well. And he kind of wrote back and said, oh, yeah, I like it. But do you not think this could be a novel? And at that point, I was like, and I think I'd already sort of just started to feel like the story was very rushed, obviously, as a short story. And so I kind of went, okay, maybe I'll just put that one on one side for a minute. And luckily I'd written something else that I could kind of put into the anthology. And then one day I just kind of sat down, and I've got a note in my notepad somewhere, like, it's like to-do list today, see if the short story could be a novel. And I just kind of looked at it and tried to work out whether I could expand, and how I would kind of expand this whole thing out. And that's where I think those ideas have kind of of having like basically a story in every car. That's where that came from, because I was kind of thinking, if I've got to kind of expand this out so that it's 80 odd thousand words instead of 3,000 words, I need to have all these more. I need to have way more stories in the mix. So that's kind of how it started life, thanks to the anthology.
Well, before we move on and I ask you another question, Laura has said she doesn't think there was a single bad story in the Afraid Of series.
Oh, that's nice to hear. Yeah, I think she's right. I think she's right. Yeah, no, they were amazing. It was an amazing thing, and I mean, I'm sure you know the story of that they came about because of COVID, because we'd met the Christmas before COVID. There was some kind of Christmas lunch or something, and at that lunch, we were just sort of saying, kind of as a joke, like, oh, we should do a short story collection together. And then sort of a couple of months later, obviously, when we realized that we were all sort of stuck at home, we kind of said, oh, well, actually, why don't we do that? And it was just to sort of entertain ourselves, really. And then we kind of thought, well, if we're going to do that, it would be really good to kind of give the money to charity. And it just sort of grew out of that. And but there's some amazing writers in that anthology. It was brilliant. But yeah, it's lovely. Thank you, Laura. It's nice to hear that.
Just keeping track of what people have said.
Yeah. I can't see the comments, by the way. So
there are so many comments. Laura said, will you stick to standalones or would you ever do a series? Which is going to feed into my question, because when I was writing my review, I feel like Billy has more to say. And I'm kind of curious as to whether there's going to be another book with Billy in.
Okay. Yeah. Good question. So at the moment, I am contracted to write standalone. So the next book that I've written does not feature Billy. But I agree with you. And I feel that she's got more. I mean, I wrote this as a standalone. But literally it ends. I mean, this is no great spoiler, but it literally ends with her sort of, driving off into the sunset. And I kind of thought, yeah, where's she going? Where's she going next? And there's actually quite a lot. There are still potentially quite a lot of balls up in the air. I think particularly on a personal level, there's a lot of. So she's a sort of, well, she's about my age. She's a sort of early 50s, menopausal woman. It kind of starts though. So at the beginning of the book, when all the traffic stops, it's Friday afternoon and the traffic all stops on the motorway, and she kind of catches herself and she's relieved. Initially, she's relieved that the traffic has stopped because she's suddenly become quite afraid of driving. And this is not an unusual thing, actually. I mean, I know quite a lot of women sort of my age and a bit older who just sort of suddenly lose their confidence in all sorts of ways. Like it's one of those weird hidden sort of symptoms almost of menopause. It's just this bizarre sort of loss of confidence. And that's a sort of a thread that runs all the way through the book. And a lot of it is about her sort of potentially being at the end of her career and not feeling ready for that, feeling like, wait, I've only just kind of got started, I think because police careers quite often end a little bit earlier as well if you've gone in at a young age. She feels like she's too young, like she's not finished yet. And this case that she solves on the motorway is almost a chance for her to kind of prove herself, to prove that she's this life in the old dog yet. Is it a dog? Life in the old what yet? Is it the old dog? I feel like it's another animal, and I've messed up that saying. Anyway, whatever. Tell me which animal it is. There's life in her yet, anyway. And yeah, and so I mean that's something that could easily kind of roll forward into another book. And yeah, I'm kind of, if I'm honest, I'm hoping that I will have an opportunity to come back to her, but that kind of depends a little bit on, publishing and what happens. We'll see, but I would very happily do that. And also kind of look for more of these kind of unique settings, just another place where you can just sort of throw all these characters together in a kind of crucible, obviously I can't do another motorway, and I don't want to get stuck into just doing like transport. I don't want it to be like, Billy on the motorway, Billy on the bus. Billy in the train station, Billy hang gliding. It's kind of like, what, it's got to be, but it's, I don't know. Yeah, finding another kind of scenario for her to kind of get stuck into, where she's on her own and forced to be resourceful. It's almost like a sort of a Castaway kind of thing, if you remember that Tom Hanks movie. Like, she's having to kind of make things up as she goes along, and she's got no evidence bag, so she has to go off sort of looking for something that she can put bits of evidence in. I won't tell you how she solves that problem, but she does solve that problem. And so fun stuff like that was fun to play with. So yeah, it would be great to go back. I'd love to go back, and I'm very glad to hear that you think that she's got that potential.
I think that unfortunately transport and kind of weather sort of lend themselves to that kind of thing, don't they? Like, I've read some brilliant stories where people have been trapped on like a train in a snowstorm, or like something like that. It's kind of very easy to stick people somewhere that's like a bit travel themed.
Yeah, there's been so many travel books. I mean, there's obviously like a big thing at the moment, isn't there, with obviously with destination thrillers. So sort of people on an island, people in a ski chalet, people, and then people on boats, loads of boats, cruise ships, trains. I can't think of a train. When is there a train? Well, I mean, obviously back in the day, there's Agatha Christie. Then I'm sort of meaning more modern, but yeah.
There's Anne Holt's book. She's a Norwegian author.
Yeah.
She's got one where they're trapped at the Hunts railway station.
Okay. Yes.
Really
if you can think of it, it's probably been done. I think that's the thing. Yeah, no, I mean, again, because I think it's where you throw people together. So it just, it makes sense, really. And obviously there's been a run of aeroplanes that was falling, and then even on the TV, there's been hijack. So much potential.
There's also a really great kids series called Adventures on Trains.
Oh, I don't know that.
Me. They're brilliant. They all take place on a genuine, like, really cool train route.
Oh, well, that must have come. Like, my kids are teenagers now, so I've sort of come out of there was a time when I was across kids television. That was the Peppa Pig years, and now it's near. Now I've lost touch a little bit. That sounds cute.
They're pretty cool. They're like, I don't know, probably sort of mid-grade book.
Okay,
I would say, but worth a read.
Sounds good.
I quite enjoy it.
Lots
of people here talking about what they would buy, what kind of books they give a go or wouldn't give a go. Laura says she doesn't like anything with a Reese's Book Club sticker on from past disagreements. Well, I always ask this question, but what have you read recently and really enjoyed? So give the readers some recommendations.
What have I read? So I've literally just finished a book called Barrowbeck, which isn't out yet, but it's by a writer called Andrew Michael Hurley. So he wrote a book called The Loney, and then after that he wrote a book called Starve Acre, and they're really hard to describe. They're almost borderline horror. They're kind of folk horror, so they're quite sort of pagan and weird, and they're very much sort of set in the countryside, in the landscape. Starve Acre I just thought was absolutely amazing. I loved it so much, and then it's been turned into a film. The film's coming out, I think, in September, and I just read the new one, and it's almost like short stories, actually. It's set in a village in Yorkshire. I don't know if it's a real village or not. It's called Barrowbeck. I'm assuming it's a made-up village in Yorkshire, and it covers like 2,000 years of history. So it starts with like the first sort of Celtic people. The first short story is these Celtic people moving to this valley, but it's kind of cursed. And so this curse kind of goes all the way through across these 2,000 years. Yeah, I love that. I thought that was great. I love his writing. And then I'm going to have to go, and I've got such an awful memory. Like, I read a book and then one moment later it's gone out of my head. So I'm just looking at my Goodreads. to see what else I've read recently. And then I just read The Ministry of Time. Have you done that one?
That's the one that's quite controversial, isn't it?
Yeah, there seems to be some claim that it's quite similar to a Spanish TV series. But I think the writer has said that she's never seen the TV series. I don't know. I quite enjoyed it. It was fun. It was kind of it was quite thoughtful and quite sexy, I have to say. It had quite a sexy Victorian man in it. Quite like that. What else have I read recently? Oh, I read The Great Deceiver, the Ellie Griffiths book, which was fantastic. I love that. I love her Brighton series because I'm sort of quite new to Brighton. I've lived here for about 6 years, 5-6 years, and so because her books are set sort of in the 50s and the 60s in Brighton, I feel like I'm getting a sort of an education in this town sort of through her books. So I really like those. And yeah, what else? I've read Conviction and Redemption, the Jack Jordan books, quite recently. They're amazing. And another one that I read a couple of months ago is The Dead Friend Project. Do you know Joanna Wallace? Her first novel was called You'd Look Better as a Ghost, which was sent to me as a proof, and I just loved it. It's so funny. It's really funny. It's kind of a crime novel, and it's quite sort of edgy, but it has this amazing humour that runs through it. It's laugh out loud funny. I'm doing an event with her actually in a couple of weeks' time, and her new one is called The Dead Friend Project. But she just, her books are just so unique because they've got this kind of really, like I say, this really sort of off-kilter humour that runs through them. But I love them. I definitely recommend those. So she's called Joanna Wallace. So I'm reading, always have something on the go.
Me too. Sarah wants to know if you're going to any book festivals this year.
Yeah, so what am I going to? I'm going to Harrogate in a couple of weeks' time, but just to sort of hang out, really. That's quite good. And I was hoping to do some later in the year, sort of some up north, because there seems to be so many amazing festivals that happen. I see sort of other people's photographs from festivals. Like last year, I was looking at people's photographs from Butte Noir and places like that, and Bay Tales, and they look absolutely brilliant. Everyone was raving about Bay Tales, I think. So I'm sort of hoping that I might get there. And the other one that I would absolutely love to do is Iceland. I'd love to go to the one in Iceland. But I need to kind of see if I can actually, get to speak or something at that one, because otherwise it's a big commitment to go all the way to it just for fun. I don't know whether I can get a pass out of the house. I can get like a pass from the children for the weekend. I need that one to be sort of convincingly work before I can go all the way to Iceland. But I'd love to do that one, mainly because I want to go to the ambassador's house, because everyone seems to go to the ambassador's house, and I have a slightly bizarre obsession with ambassadors. I don't know why. I just think they're the coolest thing. I've never got over the Ferrero Rocher adverts. I just want to go.
I talked to an author recently who'd been like a foreign policy advisor and an ambassador, and he was really interesting.
Yeah, it's such a fascinating. I've lived. Sorry, go on, Caroline.
Yeah, go on.
No, it's I mean, I've lived abroad quite a lot, and the last place I lived, I was in Singapore, and on our road was just sort of around the corner from our road. There was suddenly this road with like loads of the ambassadors' residents, like all these like amazing sort of houses that they have, and I was always just kind of walking past and kind of like I was always eyeballing over the gate and things like that. I don't know. It's probably it's something I know absolutely nothing about it. It's got a completely probably like stereotyped idea of what it is like to be an ambassador. It just seems so possibly glamorous. And from the little I have seen while I've been abroad, it seems like they get all the best houses. So I feel like I missed my calling there. I wish I'd gone into that.
He'd been ambassador in the Lebanon though, and he said that he quite often got like a breakfast meeting that was all the ways people were planning to kill him that day. So
Oh,
I don't think
okay.
it's as glamorous as it seems.
Well, it's not all Ferrero Rocher then. It's actually more serious than that. Who knew?
Actually, some danger. I'm a really big fan of Bradford Literature Festival. That doesn't get as much of a press outside
Okay.
of Yorkshire as it should. It has some great crime stuff, but it's like a really mixed literature festival, and it's just like it's glorious. Like they have an amazing array of stuff on. Like I don't
That
think
sounds
anyone
brilliant.
would find something they would like.
Yeah, that's actually nice, I think, to have a mixed one. That's what I forgot to say. One I'm doing in a couple of months' time. It's there's one called Shoreham Word Fest. Shoreham is like the next town along from Brighton, and it has a brilliant actually arts centre there called the Rope Tackle Centre, and they have a really good literary festival. I can't say that, literature festival. And then on the side, for a couple of years, Ellie Griffiths and William Shaw were organising like a one-day crime festival called Fatal Shaw that was kind of connected to it. But the whole sort of word fest that's a fantastic festival, and like you say, they have so many interesting people, and it's a bit like you were saying earlier with the music. Like you kind of, what I love about that is you go along for a day and you just go into every session and you've no idea what you're going to learn next. And I love that. Yeah, you might have one person talking about crime, and then the next session, I went to one a couple of years ago, and then there was a guy that had sort of written a book of philosophy, and then the next person was talking about, I don't know what, like Arctic terns or something. You come away at the end of the day and you're just like, my head is kind of just full of all this new information, and I will probably forget most of it, but how amazingly mind expanding. Yeah, it's brilliant. But what amazes me with all these festivals, I mean, like you mentioned the Bradford one, as an author, you don't really know quite often how all of these things get kind of programmed. Like you always see the program when it kind of comes out, and so you sort of think, oh, I'd do that, I'd love to do that, I'd love to do that. But you can only do so many, and yeah, they're always fun.
As someone who's organised one, I know how they're programmed.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, you would.
Yeah, it's normally just who volunteers. People
Yeah.
volunteering goes a long way to you choosing who goes on the program, and like what.
So again,
like if people volunteer, that goes a long way to helping.
Yeah.
Or whoever fits like the theme that you're going for, things like that. You'll see me and Sarah at Harrogate. We'll both be there.
Oh, that's good. I will look out for you in the tent.
Yeah. Donna wanted to know if you're a planner anyway, or if the short story that you had helped writing Dead Mile.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly helped because for 3,000 words, I look back now and I think I must have been like crazy to think I was going to write this in 3,000 words. But anyway, whatever. So, but I kind of did. But what I basically had was almost like a first page and a last page just squashed together. So I did obviously have the beginning and I had the ending. Like I knew this sort of news, related story idea that you alluded to earlier. I had that, and I sort of had to work out all the new stuff that was going to kind of go in between. But yeah, I am a bit of a planner, not kind of strict. I mean, I wouldn't plan something out kind of chapter by chapter, but I tend to know the ending, and I tend to know sort of a couple of points along the way, like what they call that some people I've heard it described as the tent posts. So like you've got like the 4 posts that are going to hold up the tent, and I sort of know the beginning, sort of the big thing that's going to happen at the beginning, and the midpoint, and then the ending. And I quite often sit down and start to plan. I've just done this with the thing that I'm writing now, where I sat down and I said, I'm definitely not going to write it. I'm just going to plan it out. I'm going to have like a really detailed outline so that I can put it to one side and then I'm going to have to get on with edits for book 2 at some point, and then I can pick it back up again and go. And that was my plan. And then one day I just sort of realized that I was accidentally writing it. Like I just started writing because I would sort of sit down and you start, doodling away with something. And then the next thing I know, I've sort of written a few, like a scene and then another thing. And then, and I'm writing it. I'm just, yeah. I mean, not entirely pantsing it because I do kind of know like my 4 things, but I have just let myself go and going, I'm writing it now. So I've now got like 35,000 words, and I'll have to put that to one side instead.
What can you tell us about what you are writing now?
Oh, okay. Well, so hang on, I'm just going to stop my computer doing bings. So the next book is called Guilt Trip. And there's actually an extract, like the first chapter of it is in the back of Debmar. So that is set in a school. So it starts on a Monday afternoon, and a mum is sort of called into school sort of midway through the afternoon. She assumes that her daughter's in some sort of trouble, but in fact she's told that the school minibus carrying sort of her teenage daughter and a bunch of other teenagers has just disappeared. It's just vanished. They've got no idea where it's gone, and the police can't. It's just a mystery. And all the parents are kind of put into the school hall. They're all kind of told, and they all just immediately start to kind of suspect each other of some kind of involvement, something that someone has done that's caused this thing to happen to their children. So they all start kind of going at each other. And then every other chapter sort of goes back in time to that morning, and you sort of see what these teenage children were doing, and so you sort of follow the story. So it's got 2 timelines, but all on the same day. You've got kind of one timeline in the afternoon and one timeline in the morning, and then obviously they inevitably collide. So having said earlier that I didn't want to have like some sort of like transport theme, I've managed to do a book on a motorway and then a book involving a minibus. So I've sort of pushed myself into this corner. And then the other thing that I'm writing, the one that's like I'm not supposed to be writing, but I've accidentally started writing, that's something completely different, and it's almost got like a supernatural element to it. So I'm just sort of writing that because it was in my head and I just felt like I should get it out. I don't know what will become of that. That's not going to be one that will be part of this book deal, because it just doesn't fit, because it's weird and supernatural and a bit, again, like almost horror adjacent. But I'll just see what happens with that, see if it actually turns into anything, worth reading. And that's what I'm up to.
You're selling it to me though. I love weird supernatural and horror adjacent.
I'm quite excited about it, actually. I really enjoy the whole sort of world of it and writing. And again, going back to your question, that was so insightful. It's about a mum and her son, and they move into this house that he has inherited sort of quite unexpectedly. And they're completely on their own. They're isolated. They've moved they've had to move away. They've had to move away to a new town. So she sort of has lost all of her kind of all of her community that she had before, and it's just her and him. And the moment they move into this house, she feels that he starts to change, and she's trying to work out whether it's kind of just like normal teenage change. Well, she's not trying to work it out. She's pretty convinced that he's being affected by something in this house. And the day they move into the house, there's a letter on the doorstep from this company called the Black Plaque, which is a bit like, the blue plaques, the historic blue plaques where you sort of said, Oscar Wilde lived here or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
This company is called the Black Plaques, and they put black plaques on the front of houses that commemorate kind of macabre, sinister histories that happened in those properties. So when they arrive at this house, there's a letter from this company saying, we want to put a black plaque on the front of your house because it was the site of this infamous murder. So that's kind of how that's how they're greeted to their new home. And she's fairly convinced that there is some sort of unsavory things going on in this house that's affecting her son, and that's her job, is to sort of basically prove that he's not responsible for the things that he's doing. And And I think what it's about, if I ever sort of get to the point, is it's kind of about how we as parents are kind of responsible for what our children do, which again is something I've just been reading about in the news. There's been so many cases recently of children doing, or young, very young adults doing terrible things, and I always think it's interesting how the parents of those kids get treated, and the sort of suspicion that almost falls on the parents. So that's, I don't know, I'm playing around with that. Don't know if it will turn into anything.
And then before we finish, remind everyone what they're going to go away and buy today.
They are going to buy my book, which is called Dead Mile, which is out on ebook in all the usual ebook places, and it will be out in paperback on June the 4th. And you won't forget that, because it's quite a big day. There's something else happening on not June the 4th, July the 4th, something else.
Yeah,
general election, something like that. So as soon as you hear general election, think Dead Mile. But I do have one copy to give away if anyone would be interested in that. So if you would like to win a copy, then maybe we can use the comments. I was going to ask you to guess my favorite car snack, because this book obviously is taking place on a road trip, and car snacks are the most important part of any road trip. It's the first thing that we always do is go in and invest heavily in Monster Munch and what have you. So if you can guess my favorite, or whoever comes closest to guessing my favorite car snack, can win a copy of Dead Mile. And tell me, I can either send you the ebook or the bookie book when it comes out soon. So there you go.
I mean, to be quite frank, snacks are important at any time.
That is true, but when you're in that confined space, because the great thing about being on a road trip is that the calories don't count. They don't stick. It can't possibly count. That would be unfair, and you have to keep your strength up for the long road ahead. So it's absolutely the most delightful part. In fact, all the time when we were living abroad, it was one of our favorite things, as we would arrive, we'd come back for a visit, and we'd come out of the airport and just go straight into the nearest services, and everyone, because you can't get the same snacks when you live overseas. And it's the worst thing about living outside of the country, is not being able to get your favorite snacks. So that would be our first pit stop, was to stock up on all the things that we'd missed. So vital.
Right, yeah, agreed. And then all that's left to say is thank you. Thanks so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for having me again. It's always lovely to speak to you, and hello to everyone. And thank you so much for your support.